Well, without further ado, let me introduce our panel. Carolyn Strauss. John Hawkes. Timothy Olyphant. Ian McShane. Dan Minahan.
Yeah, Dan.
Robin Weigert. Kim Dickens.
Yeah.
And Gregg Fienberg. So, I think my first question has to be for all of you. Did you ever think that this was actually going to happen?
No.
No.
Oh.
No.
No, I mean, we stayed in touch irregularly, but regularly over the years. But it's sort of the next Deadwood wasn't always, even at Breakfast with David now again, it wasn't always just about the next Deadwood. It was just that we had those 3 years anyway, which was an extraordinary 3 years, and these extraordinary people, we got to work together, and that was kind of, after a while, that was enough, you know? That was enough until this script came along. Over to you, Tim.
I'm sorry, what was the question? Did we already thank the people for being here? Yes? Thank you for being here. Matt, thank you. Took beat in your bowling game to be here. We appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
The question is, did we think it was going to happen? Yeah. No fucking way.
Do you remember the feeling, just the physical sensation of finding out that there wasn't going to be a fourth season? Like, or has that faded over time?
Oh, that's very vivid. Please.
Well, it's like, not to be morbid, but it's like, when someone famous gets assassinated or something like that, you remember where you are. I remember exactly where I was and exactly where I was sitting in a recording studio when David called, and I'll never forget the feeling. Bad feeling. So I'll always remember that day.
Yeah, same. I was sitting in my backyard. Phone call that morning. My wife said, "It's David." It's unusual. He told me the show's over. I said, "I just bought a fucking house." I said, "Come over. I want you to see it before I sell it."
Well, I want to go back to just briefly to the beginning. Now, there had never been a television show like this. There had never been a Western with language like this, and I don't just mean the profanity. What was it like reading that pilot script, or just reading the pages that you auditioned with? Like, let's go back in the time machine and tell me what that was like. Kim, you want to take a stab at that?
Well, I wasn't in the pilot. I came in, Joanie Stubbs came in episode 3. So,
well, let's go with episode 3.
Yeah. I liked the bad language. It was great. I'd worked with David Milch in like 2001. We did a series for CBS called Big Apple. So, we were playing modern day New York detectives and stuff, but I was familiar with David and the process and the music of the language and everything. So we just got to cuss a lot more on HBO.
Robin, how did you find this character of Calamity Jane?
Well, every character comes a different way, and this one I got out of the mirror. I looked at some pictures of her, and I wouldn't sort of quit trying things until I believed that my reflection could be that person. So I did it sort of outside in, which is not typically how I work, but it's different, the demands are different in every role. So this one, though, it was so reliant for me in the beginning, like, the magic feather, it was so reliant on that. I remember wedging a hat, getting my hair underneath it and feeling like my neck was somehow too thin and covering it with a kerchief and doing, stuff and finding this voice and finding this way. And I went in and I was kind of the biggest badass I could figure out how to be, because I figured that's who she must have been. And the feedback came, loved the vulnerability. Good God. And they said, can you be a bit more? And it was all the qualities I tried like hell to conjure. So the only place I could go from there was to a costume shop. And I actually rented a costume for an amount of money that at the time seemed obscene to me, because I was mostly a theater actor back then and you don't make any money in the theater. And so I got a barn jacket and chaps and was a real fool about it. And but that ended up being the thing, and I brought it on the airplane with me to LA, where I'd never been before. And the beauty part of it was I somehow got the part the same day I tested for it, and I was dressed in this crazy cowboy way. I walked across Avenue of the Stars dressed like a cowboy because I was a walker because I lived in New York and they put me up in a hotel right across the street from HBO. So I didn't trust that I could be seen for a moment not looking like that. So
I remember the barn jacket.
You do remember the barn, yeah.
stuck
And
with
I
me.
cussed out this. It was a nerve-wracking situation, obviously, but all of you were arrayed in your suits around a table. Incredibly intimidating, and I had to call you all a bunch of cunts, and I really used the room. I was cursing out everybody for not going down the Spearfish Road to save that girl, and my nerves were cured by the fact that I was being so unbelievably irreverent, and then I sort of went really high after getting it, and then I crashed, because I couldn't believe my life was going to have to change that much. It's very ensconced in New York, and then I ended up, by coincidence, riding the plane back with David. And he switched up seats so that we could sit next to each other, and it was one of the most charmed plane rides of my life. It was like the world was kind of just opening up before me. And it was beautiful.
Had you ever played a role like that?
Like that? I mean, it's not every other day, No, I mean, most certainly not. And I think over time, she and I melded more and more. There was an unexplored area of myself, I suppose, that was being expressed through. It's like a shadow self being expressed through this vehicle, and then I began to see more and more of David in her, and her physicality began to more and more resemble David's over time.
You were channeling him.
Well, no, I began to see, like, he would come and be her, and there was always some of this, and sometimes he'd pretzel himself, and there was a her that was in him that I began to want to mine, and so her physical life changed as I began to, so it was an evolution, and he began to see things in me, scary amounts of things in me, and the beauty part of the relationship over time was also, and this is a gift that David, I think, has given to each one of us, is he'll see the thing in you think should stay buried and should stay unseen because it's not for public consumption, and he'll love that thing, and he'll bring it out into the sunlight, and he'll somehow love it enough that then it becomes a lovable thing, even in your own eyes. And so there's something very healing about working with this man.
Well, you provided me with a perfect segue to ask Tim.
I can follow that. That was
By the way, none of us have heard that fucking story.
Never. It was wonderful. Never heard it.
You fucking bitch. We never went to our fucking trailers. All we did was tell stories, and now you bring that out.
He took you on an airplane ride. He took me to the track.
There you go.
And he said, "These are your winnings from the first race." I said, "What?" He said, "Never mind. Just enjoy. You're Crab Louie." And then his horse was in the fifth race, and we watched it come out, and for about 3 furlongs, it was sort of leading. And then he said, "There's another horse in the race, same trainer." I said, oh, and of course the other trainers, the same trainer's horse won it in the end. So David's walking out, we're walking out, and this trainer comes over, a very famous one, by the way, who said, David goes, this is, I said, hello. And David's in the middle, the trainer's this side, and the trainer's going, you know, David, your horse was great for the first 3 furlongs, but, you know, the other horse, and then it came round and had a little, and David said, this is 2 guys lying to each other, okay? Doesn't it tell you about him? That's like that remark about he sees in you. I mean, he's a psychological, you know, he sees in you things, all of us. That's why, I mean, the 3 years were so great together, and making this film was so great. Because the characters weren't how they were 10 years ago. I think you'll agree on that. They've moved on, you know, as they should. Nothing could be more boring than going back and revisiting these characters at the same time. They've changed emotionally. Some have matured, some haven't, whatever, but I saw it last night, and you moved me.
Well, Tim, you're not going to escape this.
Yeah.
When I visit
about finding the character.
Well, when I visited the set, the first time I visited the set was in 2005 when we all were filming season 2.
That's when I like to think of it, that's when I was rehearsing the role. I rehearsed the role for about 2-3 years back in 2005 or 6. And then I said, give me a decade to think about it. And I'm going to come back and knock this fucker out of the park. That's my process. That's my process.
Well, you said to me at the time...
Look forward to Hitman 2028. It's going to be fucking great. I'm going to get it right.
Well, but you said to me at the time that you expressed some surprise that you were even playing this role because you had not played parts like that. And this, you know, to me, this is a recurring theme of David Milch's casting.
Yeah, a couple weeks in, I said to Ian, I don't... When did I become the fucking straight guy? I used to having all the fun. I used to do that for a living. Yeah, no, but...
No, it's you.
Yeah.
Gary Cooper. And that's Mendel's the highest compliment.
Well, God bless
You
you.
got the walk down, you got the gun down.
Hold on, say it again with the microphone.
You got the walk down, you got the gun down, you got everything down, baby.
That's funny.
Did David ever tell you why you? Did he say what he saw in you that made you think you could be that guy?
No, nothing like that. I'll tell you what. I'm being serious. Here's what I remember. This is what I remember. I remember reading it, and I've got a meeting with Walter Hill. God bless him, the best, and David, and I think. I'm just not going to say anything, and I'm just going to stare at him, and I see if it pulls it off. And my agent called back and said, meeting went great, and David was a little intimidated by him. Because he was like strong, silent type or something. I told my wife, she just burst out laughing. Strong, silent type. So that's, I don't know, somehow I pulled it off.
The set, this was an unusual production in that you had the writers, the set was interiors and exteriors, right? All of them, like it was, you could walk right in. And you had the stables and the costumes and everything was all in one
Everything
place,
was
right?
there. That's the great advantage I think that we had, wasn't it? Carolyn, you can take it from there, please. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, no, it was like a big sandbox. I mean, it was big, and David could write and come on the stage and go back to his office and, you know, walk down the street. It was kind of the perfect setup for him.
How does the energy change when you're shooting a show that way as opposed to the usual way where things are geographically separated?
I mean, I think, you know, Gregg, you was sort of around for it too, but it was very organic, you know, the flow between things. Maybe it made it sometimes too easy to let things go, but I think, you know, in terms of the flow between the actors, the writers, and the ongoing creative process, it was pretty ideal, especially for somebody who works like David does.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. I have heard conflicting legends of how much rewriting there was on the set. Like, you know, revisions, like new pages and things like that.
It wasn't rewriting, it was always just creatively more on the moment. I mean, David had come in. I think the process worked the same for all of us, didn't it? That he'd come in and talk about the scene, then we'd rehearse it, and he'd be there while the rehearsal process went on. And then he'd say, you carry on and you rehearse it for a while, or he'd come back. Sometimes he'd come back and he'd just watch. And then after the first take, when he knew you were on the right track and whatever, he'd go away. Or he'd come back with a few little subtle changes. And it went. And what I meant by the location was great because you could change things around.
Well, and there were
You know.
times too, I mean, to be fully honest, there were times when we'd be called to set and there'd not yet have been a scene. You know, and maybe we'd be used and maybe we wouldn't, because the scene was yet to come, and there'd be this incredible. Those are my favorite things, because those were the moments when you got to watch David incarnating the characters as he would invent in the space, in time, and you got to watch him be everybody, because he was finding our lines whilst being us as he found them, you know, and it would seem to come out of the air, and Gabby Endicott, our wonderful script supervisor, would be there with a pencil writing furiously, and someone would go off and type it up, and you'd need to learn it in the moment sometimes. It's just a very unconventional way of working, and I love those days so much.
Were there instances where David would take something from a conversation that you had or from something that happened in your life and it would just show up in a scene or a storyline?
Yeah, Dayton made some comment about thinking he looked funny in his suit, and that went right in. I remember.
He's like, is this kind of girlish? He would say about, and then and suddenly in the episode, it's like he's walking around asking everybody, "Does this look feminine to you?" It's so great. It's so great. Boom, boom.
It happened all the time.
I mean, the truth is we had scripts through the first 4 episodes of season 1, and we would do production meetings and all the usual stuff that shows do. And then by episode 5, we had about a half a script. And then at that point, from that to the end of the series, pages would just come usually the day before or the day of. And that's how we would shoot going forward. We never had production meetings. Directors would come in and it would be, well, let's go and have lunch. I'll tell you what might happen in the episode. and some of it would, and some of it wouldn't, and it would happen.
It sounds like, it almost like the way you're describing it, it sounds like it's like a Mike Lee film with cowboy hats or something.
Well, no, I was looking forward to season 4 because that's when we were all going to wear earbuds and David was going to talk our lines. And I thought, that's real acting because you've got to, that would have been great.
Yeah, exactly.
So how does that work? Is like everybody just on call? Like you're on the set and in case you're needed, really? Yeah?
Yeah, the end.
Doctor with a beeper. It was like a doctor with a beeper.
We'd get call sheets where we'd all be on them, scenes to be written. That's what it said.
The rule was that everybody had to be available all the time. And there were days, we did one episode that was supposed to be a bottle episode, because Carolyn made us do a bottle episode where it was, we're gonna shoot this thing in 4 days. It was
good discipline.
It was all gonna be in the gem. And so it started out the first day, we got the script, it's in the gem. And like in day 2 is like it's in the gem, but then it starts to go outside and they go on the balcony. And next thing you know, this might have been the episode where you two were fighting and by the time, we suddenly get these pages and it goes out of the gem onto the street and everybody in the entire show shows up in the bottle episode. And we had to call the entire cast and say, get your ass up to the ranch.
Just a bigger bottle.
It was a big bottle. And it was just, that's how it would be every day. Everybody, right? You guys always had to be ready
there was so
for a
much
phone call.
goodwill in terms of how much we loved one another, that there would be days. I remember Paula having some days where she was there multiple days in a row and didn't work, but we loved watching one another's work so much. There was a great pleasure in being there. I can't think of many shows where people are doing anything but sitting in their trailers, and something like that.
I think that's true. People were eager to, when you got the call, it was a good call because everybody wanted to come and, you knew you were going to have good work to do.
Yeah.
It's remarkable hearing how strong a lot of the relationships were on that show, considering how much time you already were spending together. Like it wasn't like an hour or 2 hours a day. Like you were really hanging out, weren't you?
Go ahead, John. You got it.
I said, Tim, we were spread out a little. It's not like we were all on set all the time waiting to work. You're on call from home, basically. So yeah, I mean, we were, but I don't have I ever been so close to a group of creative people over that much time.
Yeah.
Just don't make me drive on the 405 after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you know.
There were.
What were some of the highlights for you, like just as somebody participating in this fiction, like the shooting of a particular scene or sequence that really, when you think of Deadwood, that you immediately think of that?
Just those days when David went off, those days when you were just like, I hope today's one of those days where even if we don't work even if he holds everything up for an hour and a half, just to watch him work was so inspiring, so exciting, so batshit crazy.
Yeah.
It took me forever. I always went through the same, probably a season and a half before I finally got over this process where I was like, it's a great scene and he's fucking it up. That was my first instinct. Like he's just ruining it. And then I thought he's joking. Whereas there's no way we're gonna do that. Right? That's what where I started was like, he's obviously fucking with us. And then I realized, he's not fucking with us, he's serious. And then I realized, oh Jesus, it's just fucking brilliant. And it's a level, it's a depth of an understanding of humanity that's beyond me. And I'd like to assume from being around him, maybe I've inherited some of it.
Well, I think it was that an understanding of humanity and an ability to kind of take advantage of a moment and sort of use whatever the energy of that moment was, whether it was in the writing room, on the stage, in the edit room. It was sort of seeing the best that he could get out of the particular moment.
Or at lunch, or walking off the set.
Yeah.
I saw for the first time what I think I'd heard about, which was a man who didn't see any separation between the work and your life. And he saw the possibilities. He was available to reach out and grab ideas as they floated by, with the fearlessness, with the trust that he'd done the work so that the moment of inspiration could be trusted, knowing it would get back on the tracks. I'd never seen anything like it. And I'm not a writer, but I knew that that's where I wanted to live. I wanted to live with that kind of freedom, with that kind of fearlessness. It was something special, and it happened daily.
Day out. Day in, day out. I think
and there was no off switch. I was walking off the stage with him once. You open a door, you go into a little space before you open the second door, and a light comes in. David walked right into the fucking wall. It really hit his head hard, to the point where I was like, David, are you okay? And he looks at me and goes, Tim, goddammit, if I couldn't become addicted to that. And the next day, there are pages where a guy's hitting his head over and over. And one of them says, hey, did you see these new pages? And I was like, no, I was there when it happened. There was never a thing. I remember talking to him at lunch. We were talking about getting in fights as kids. I used to get in a lot of fights as kids when I was a kid, and he's talking about getting in fights. And I said, I used to get in fights, even if I was winning. I'd be like tears running down my face, and he's like, "Isn't that who you want? Like, isn't that what you want?" My memory's a very unreliable narrator, but I know I got pages shortly thereafter where Bullock is choking Jack McCall, tears in his eyes. Jack McCall saying, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "This fucker." So it's what you said. He's seeing things. You don't realize you're telling him. You don't realize you're telling him. You don't realize we're talking about the work.
Let's talk about the town of Deadwood for a second, just the space itself. Like, what was it like being on that set? What was it? What did it feel like? What did it smell like? What did it sound like?
Smoky.
Smoky?
Smoky give you a sore throat.
that smoke smell, yeah.
I know
Like
that
being in the church.
I kind of eventually stopped inviting a certain kind of guest, I guess, because people would come to visit, And if they hadn't really thought it through, they were, ankle deep in horse shit and piss in, $1,000 shoes or whatever. It wasn't for everybody, I guess, in that way. But my favorite thing to do, and Molly Parker actually talked about this, we did it independently and had the same thought, which was to get there really early and walk out on the street before anyone else is there. The sun is maybe not quite even up yet, and you felt like you're in a magical fucking place. It was amazing. It was pretty easy to pretend when craftspeople are that phenomenal. There's hundreds of thousands of art. If you start to add up the whole set and all that's there, it's just so much stuff everywhere. Like with vegetables and deer carcasses bleeding, and and then
those details are fascinating because I've been fortunate enough to visit the set when it was shooting and also for the movie, and one of the things that jumped out at me was that there were details that the camera never sees. There were things like in drawers, right? Yeah. Did you take when you left? Did you guys get any souvenirs from the set? I think the statute of limitations has passed.
I got a confession to make. I got a Bella Union chip.
Give it back.
We've been looking for that, John. It's the only thing we've been missing this whole time.
Exactly.
And I have to say, I'm such a nerd. I asked, "Hey, can I steal this?" And the props guy said, "Sure, we got 1 million of those."
I have my top hats.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Plural. You took a couple.
I've got the gray one with the chiffon bit, and then I've got the brown straw one, which was also a top hat.
You wear it to Ralph's?
You don't know my life.
It ended so quickly I didn't get a chance to steal anything. I've just come back for a day, can I? While I take my boots.
What did people say to you about the show after it was canceled? Like, did they ask you for explanations? Did they want you to do impressions of the characters? I mean, what? It was a show that made such a strong impression on people who saw it.
Apparently, if you go to Deadwood, wherever you've been invited, that's where they really sort of, the real town, because it became totally synonymous with the TV show. And I think it was Earl that went for Weekend, and he said, "Thank God you weren't there." He said, because 10 yards away, somebody goes, "Hi, cocksucker! Hi, motherfucker!" Just an excuse. Or when you call me every obscene name under the world, you say, "There's a dominatrix in the phone book." You can do it that way if you want. But why should I write somebody? Right, cocksucker on my. No, please. It's just an excuse to say it. People felt. I'll never forget when we tried dubbing it once for channels that weren't, streaming. That was hilarious.
I can't imagine.
Sitting there with the ADR guy, and Fienberg, I think, was there at one point, and going, "Could you say lemon sucker?" I said, fuck this, I'm out of here. You can't. This will never be on an afternoon program.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Quincy, followed by, cocksuckers.
We tried it once, and then we just said, you know what? If they're going to do it, just bleep it. We're not going to do this anymore.
This is good because I got an email today about doing lines for syndication, and I'm blowing that off.
No, you did not get that email.
You just said it right there. We're done.
We
It's
kiboshed
done.
that.
Oh,
We're
that's
not doing
great.
that.
No, I'm going to reply now. You guys keep talking. Feinberg said, "Fuck it."
For the syndication looping, we were left to our own devices because David didn't really want to touch that, and so sometimes so cob shucker became a word, and I think the one I was proudest of, there was a direction of this entire fucking camp makes me sick, and it bores the living shit out of me, and I had to loop that with no cuss words. And I came up with a direction of this entire freaking town makes me sick, and it buffs the lively sheen off of me. Because it matched the lips the best.
That's surreal.
I had to say party for instead of what. You boys looking for some party?
and then to E.B. Farnham, be fucked became be French. Like that was the worst thing you could wish on someone.
Oh my God. The adventures in dubbing alone, really something else. Is there, as a viewer of the show, is there a moment in the show that you, like, just as somebody, even as somebody who participated in the show, where you went, holy shit, that's a great moment?
It's one of those shows that, you know, you're away in some lonely hotel room filming in some obscure part of America, and suddenly you switch on the TV and Deadwood comes on, and I always go like, oh, I'll just watch for a couple of minutes, you know, and then half an hour later you're still going, I don't remember that. And this is because it wasn't because you were held from reading the other people's scripts, it's because it was put together so beautifully and so like a mosaic, which is what I think was attractive about what we've been saying about working on the show, that it was the fearlessness which I think everybody took with them. It made me a better actor, I know that. Everybody around here, I mean, really, I mean, every job should, but they don't. This one did. It made me aware more, you know, I mean, I think, and the relationships that you form and the quality, and you don't realize people coming in felt, you know, a little intimidated. I remember Brian Cox saying, Jesus, I was really coming on the show. It was the first time I'd felt that by the sheer presence of the actors, the sort of what they were giving off from Milch. And let's face it all comes from Milch. That's why we're here. That's why we are here. And, you know, yeah, let's give a round. But he inspires that kind of stuff, you know, he really did, constantly. I think he was harder on directors than anyone else down, wasn't he? How was he with you? Because you directed how many, about 3 during the regular?
I think I did about 5 altogether, yeah. I think it was one of the first series that I worked on. David kind of gave me a shot at it. And some of the most memorable sort of mentoring experiences I had were with him. I remember being so proud of a shot that we did. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he came back to set, and he always wanted to please him. I showed him this shot. I said, let's play it back. And showed it to David, and he said, no, it's wrong. And I said, it's a great shot. And he said, don't try to tell the story with the camera. And I remember that. I think about it every time when I'm shooting, every time we set up a shot. You know, don't show off. And it was also the kind of scene where you wanted to lean in and listen to what people were saying. So it was really great. The other great adage that he gave me, the great advice that he gave me in the very first episode that I did, he said, if you can't make it, fake it. And I employ it every day.
Is there such a thing as a Deadwood moment? Is there a particular thing about Deadwood that is distinctive, like as a filmmaker?
A Deadwood moment?
Yeah.
I think it's always going with the humanity. It's always going with the unexpected, but not in a willful or a show-offy way. It's coming in at it, you know, sideways. It was always that was always the challenge for me as a director.
Here's kind of a moment, I think. Maybe this will sum it up. Maybe it'll answer your question. I'm not sure, but it'll answer a couple of your questions, at least for me. There was a episode 10, season 1. Did you direct? I don't remember who was directing. Anyway, David came to me at lunch. He's like, I realize we haven't seen the priest, the minister, since episode 5, and we need to see him. We haven't seen him for a while, so I'm going to write a scene for him, and it's going to be with Tim and with Soul Star, and we're gonna do a Saul and Bullock and the minister, and I want to do it tonight. And like now it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. We only have, you know, it's going to be night in 2 hours. And he goes, I want to kick off the scene we're going to shoot this, and so I'm going to go write it. And he goes, check if the minister is available. So I called up the minister, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment.
Ray McKinnon.
Ray McKinnon. Ray's available. I said, get in the car, drive up the 405 in this horrible traffic, get here. There's going to be a scene. He goes, what is it? I go, I have no freaking idea. He just said he's going to write a scene. It's going to be in the hardware store. 2 hours later, David comes in with the scene. I told you guys we're going to do it. You were both there for another scene. David hands me this scene. I read this thing. If I was a writer and I had written the scene, I would quit at that moment, frame it, and never write again.
Which scene? Let's so we're
It
specific.
was a scene in the hardware store with Bullock and Starr and the minister, when the minister comes in and says, "Are you guys my friends?" His brain tumor has gotten to a point where he's not sure what reality is anymore. And they help him, this is the humanity, they help him kind of to guide him towards his death, essentially. And I'll never forget this. This is the Deadwood moment for me that I'll never forget. So we come in, the way it always worked is we come in to rehearse the scene. Everybody, the whole crew would clear. The director, myself, the script supervisor, the cameraman, and the actors would be there. And David would get the scene up on his feet and talk it through. You guys would rehearse it. They got the scene together. And again, this is a scene that had been written. This is as fresh as it can be. You guys got handed it and started rehearsing it. And I'm watching this. It's beautiful. I mean, this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. They rehearse it, then we bring the whole crew in and they stand around and watch because they have to get ready to shoot the scene. You guys rehearse the scene, the director says action, you guys rehearse it, says cut, and this is what it sounded like. Could hear a pin drop. And I look around and the entire crew, and I mean the entire crew, including the key grip, crying. They're crying because of what this scene meant. Like, everybody was so into it and so cared about the show, and everyone was just moved by who these characters were, and that's how into it we were, and how beautiful David wrote scenes, and how the actors would just take what came and did it and lived it. And that was for me, that's the Deadwood moment. That's what Deadwood is.
David was the original kill your darlings. I'm just saying, he was. Yeah. I mean, for David, the problem was never writing. The problem was what to write, because he was so prolific and so talented at laying it out. Like, if you know, I think I've told the story before, but I worked with Joe Orton's second play. Same thing. The problem wasn't writing, it was what? Because it was just, that came easy. But David, if I may, follow things. I think I told that story before about when he picked up and gave me a MacGuffin. Oh, you're going over to Charlie Otters to ask him a question, but you got this box, so it's a MacGuffin. You're really trying to find this information out. But I said, fine. So we did the scene. Come back to the bar, throw the box over the bar. David says, you can't do that, Ian. I said, well, you said it's no, it's got a head in it. Really? Fine, David. I said, well, I'll tell you later. Okay, fine.
I mean, for me, like a very sort of emblematic I mean, I think they're all emblematic Deadwood moments, but in Taking the Preacher story was the moment where Swearengen kills the preacher, which is this very violent moment, but it's such a merciful moment, and I think that sort of embodied the sides of humanity that David was into, which is the amazing grace of it and also the violence of it, and Ray McKinnon comes up a lot.
Oh, very good. Did you have discussions when you were on the set that were about Deadwood and about this material, like in a larger sense, like not just what are we doing today, but the implications?
Milch would go off on German economic theory or the French Revolution, wouldn't he? I mean, he's one of the most interesting men you've ever met, and he's always great in anywhere situation, working-wise, if somebody's got a little bit of a bigger brain than anybody else in the room, and they are actually leading the charge. So you do defer quite easily to that situation because he's a little bit ahead of you in the best way, and you're working towards that, and your part in it is just as important as every other part. And that was one of the exciting things about the entire process, the entire time, was that fearlessness, that imagination, and the fact that it wasn't going to be the same, the fact that I wasn't going to come down every week, and give a 3-page speech, get a blowjob, and stab somebody, No, but that's what he said. It was quiet. He said, no, I'm going to keep you out of commission for a while, make you sick. Because that's what life is, That's regular TV, the other one,
Right.
This is us.
One of the things I noticed during my visits was that this was the only set that I'd ever been on where people would go over and watch other people's scenes being filmed that they had nothing to do with. Did you ever encounter that in any other situation, any other working situation? No?
I've only done it when I was afraid those other actors were going to suck. And so I was like, I think I should be there.
Yes.
No, you just want to watch. You just want to. I did that maybe twice, and there's another job. I was like, this is not going to go well. I should stay and watch. No, this was just marveled. This was a deep bench, as I like to say. You know, I've never seen so much talent in one room. It's really quite inspiring, quite intimidating. Even when we all got together, it was early in the shoot on this movie. I don't know if you remember, we were doing that auction scene. Everybody from the film. So they're all. I mean, right? The whole ball club's been set in. And I leaned over and I said, the problem here is every one of these fuckers knows how to steal the scene. They all know what they're doing. They're all taking these tiny little moments and just making, and they're polishing them, each one of them. Yeah, it's just something special to sit back and watch. And look, they were all really good, 12 years ago. Now they're just on another level. It's really something to see.
Well, let's talk about the Kleptomaniacs Hall of Fame then. What are some of those scene-stealing moments that you appreciate from the show? Like little things that people would do that really made a scene.
I always got a kick out of watching William Sanderson.
Oh my God.
I think he was a bit of a genius. I mean, I just think William is...
Yeah.
I mean, it's like David gave him that Shakespearean clown part, which Shakespeare couldn't write. Because Shakespeare's comedies are pretty fucking unfunny, whereas David is...
Finally, someone says it.
He's brilliantly blackly funny. And William inhabited that character. I mean, I used to get the biggest kick out of watching him do those soliloquies. What, being spat in the face and told to stand there and go on? I mean, no, wonderful. The scene of the Hostetler, when he accuses Steve, that marvelous scene when they buy, when he's sick of being insulted for being a black man. It was extraordinary, that scene. It comes out of nowhere. Then he kills himself. I mean, no, David's, it's something, it's a good show.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, just being in a scene with Robin, I mean, I just sort of, it was a dual experience of actually playing the scene with her so honest and emotionally, and then sort of just like reveling in as she shined, and she would just do these things, and I'd be in the scene and I'd think to myself, I'm so gonna imitate that later to her. So good. Like she's my favorite to imitate, and that's just the admiration.
We have a friendship in real life, and Kimmy used to just always go, I got business on my mind.
Yeah, that's when Joanie Stubbs was walking down the thoroughfare, and Calamity Jane had gotten a telegram, and she felt very implicated by it, like, so this is something bad, and so you realize she doesn't know how to read it. So she's marching across the thoroughfare to go take it to Charlie Utter, I think, right? And Stubbs is walking down, and, hi, Jane, I say, and she's like, I got business on my mind. I'm like, okay. Everyone knows how that feels.
That's LA. Yeah.
We haven't mentioned Molly Parker, and I know, particularly in the first season, watching her and her just amazing stature and her really gorgeous approach with words, and so kind of deal with a real heavy addiction, and how she tread that line of being a kind of a wealthy addict, was amazing to see. Just came to mind. But yeah.
She was such a hero in this shoot too, because she had this other commitment in Canada.
Yeah, for this shoot.
And she was flying on chartered flights and things to make it in to do her part, and she would be fast asleep on the grass in her full corset because she was so So
Yeah, at
burning the
Utter's
candle.
funeral, I remember us all kind of staring at this beautiful kind of black gown, presence just lying in grass. It looked like a beautiful painting, but it was like, let her sleep. She's been on a plane a while. She's got to leave right away again. Yeah, she was kind.
I want to take a second and talk about some of the cast members who are no longer with us, starting with Powers Booth. Can any of y'all share, like, just your impressions of Powers? You acted a lot of scenes with him.
Yes, I did. I mean, it was real heartbreaking to not have him there. You know, we had a moment in the script where we addressed it briefly, but it didn't make it in. But it was also like, it was so subtle. You know, it was just like you could feel the loss of him. I think there in the first scene between us, and but he was just such a powerful presence. He was so fun to watch when I was rewatching the series, and God, he was just great looking too. And that voice, I love the way he said, Joanie Stubbs, you know, whatever. But my favorite line of his, just the one I can never forget, was when I'd gone to him and all my whores had been murdered. And I knew he knew, and I wanted to know if there was anything I needed to do to see to the bodies. And Stubbs was devastated, and Powers, he just looks at her and he says, "It's no picnic running pussy, is it, honey?" But I can't even imitate him. It's so amazing when he says it. And Stubbs just shakes her head, no. I might get that tattooed, though. That's a good tattoo.
Another cast member that we lost recently was Ricky Jay. What was it like being around Ricky Jay, the master of illusion, and just such a distinctive presence?
One of the great Deadwood stories is the demise of Ricky Jay in the series. Ricky was great, but there's a wonderful story that sometimes, you know, the events of Deadwood overtook the reality, and Ricky was being driven to set. And the driver turned to him and said, "So, Ricky, how you feel about your last day with us, huh?" And Ricky, "What last day?" Said, "Well, you're being killed today." And Ricky didn't come out of his trailer for 6 hours. I know he'll appreciate the story, because it was true. He would not come out of it, David would not come out of his trailer.
Yeah, because he knows the first rule in movie and television is that if they don't see you die on camera, then you didn't die. So he's like, fuck it, I'm not going out there. And so we started season 3 with someone saying, Ricky's dead. Right? Well, how'd they do it? They did, right? Yeah.
You never saw him die on camera, no? No, he left. He left.
Yeah, he went. Is that what they did?
That's a great story.
There was a lot of on-camera death on the show, though, and one of the things that was distinctive, at least at the time, about the show was that people talked about it. People talked about it, like the death of Wild Bill Hickok at the end of, I guess, what is it, episode 4. That we see that even in this movie, that's still something that people think about, and I wonder, was there ever any sort of thoughts that David shared about spirituality, you know, about grief and mourning and the presence of people, because that's something that's threaded all the way through all 3 seasons of the show and in the film. Did he ever get into this sort of larger philosophy of where we are?
No, except when he said, we gotta kill the kid.
Why did he kill the kid?
I'm not telling that story again.
Have to.
I don't think I got in trouble for saying it last time.
No, it's part of the whole...
You know the story. Here's the deal. This is how I remember it. I showed up to work. I heard some rumblings that there was a problem with the kids' parents or something. The Bullock kid. Yeah, the Bullock kid.
The Bullock boy.
Yeah. Right, I'm not telling you. So I was like, I don't want any part of it. I didn't follow up. I just know there's a thing going on. An hour or 2 later, there's a knock on my trailer door, And I open it up, it's David, which is unusual. I said, what's up? He says, we're gonna kill the kid. And he's no dummy, he knows I'm an actor, so he goes, it's gonna be wonderful. And wonderful for you. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be good for the kid, too. Now, I don't know if any of you recall the season, but it's a huge storyline for the entire season. So the whole time, as wonderful as it was, I kept thinking, what the fuck was it supposed to be? If the kid didn't, you know what I mean?
He couldn't, David could just switch lanes in a second.
He just didn't kill him. He fucking did a whole thing. He had the whole bill. Everyone's gonna watch it. It's the theater of the town watching it, and the horse breaks out. And the horse that tramples the kid is the horse from the opening credits. David hated that fucking horse. He's like, I hate the fucking credits. What the fuck is this horse doing? When he decided to kill the kid, he's like, finally, I got a reason for that horse. Can we get that horse? I want that horse to trample the fucking kid. It all comes together. It's amazing.
You know what needs to be said too, though. I'm realizing as we're talking about the death of the kid, this is such an important thing to mention. Is the same stuff that was happening with us as actors was behind the scenes happening in the writers' room. There were a lot of brilliant people in that writers' room with David, whose ideas were combining with his to create these things. And I'm thinking, I think it was our friend Regina who had this idea about the bicycle, and the bicycle dovetailed into the, and there was that glorious scene of not all riding that bike, which just in and of itself was a poem, and then all of it kind of led to the death of the child. I may have the order of who thought of what, wrong, but there was the same stuff where he'd pick up little bits off of us. He was picking up all this wonderful stuff, and there was great synergy in the writers' room, and some great minds in the writers' room. It's just worth mentioning.
I would have given anything to be in that room.
Yeah.
And if there's any regrets, there was way more juice to squeeze out of this thing, and I wish I was there for more of it.
Well, let's talk about that writer's room for a bit, because it was, let's say, unusual. Can some of y'all describe it for me, set the scene?
Regina's here tonight. You can come up and give her a microphone. I bet you can tell a story.
Yeah.
I saw her.
Reggie.
Come on. There you go. Here we go. Is that happening, or are those just people leaving? Because if you're leaving, just come on. What?
Well,
There we go. Come on.
Yeah. So what's the question?
Tell us about that room. Tell us about the room.
It's hard to actually describe. I think Robin was in the room. I remember Robin came in one day in full costume. Rob, do you remember?
I don't know what show you're talking about. So.
She came in to observe, and because David was always encouraging everyone to write, and Rob came in, and it was this very repetitive scene. He was going over and over in a very meticulous way that he always was. And I looked over, and Robin was sound asleep. Full costume, with the hat pulled down. But I think it's really hard to describe. The room was incredibly engrossing, very scary, because David could be focused entirely on the dictating, and then he would turn around and say, so do you think that was too arch? And one day I said, yes. Well, why didn't you fucking say anything?
But you have to describe the room.
You have to describe the set
'Cause
the
he's
scene
not-
for them. It's very
Yeah,
unusual.
he's not writing. I mean,
He's laying
writing,
on the
but
floor,
he's laying-
flat on the floor.
Come on, tell him just.
Well, he had back problems, right? So that's where it all originated. So he would be on the floor in front of us, and we would. There was, right. That's right. He didn't know how to type, but he's.
George was the original.
He was dictating a lot.
George
of
Putnam was dictating.
And there's a screen that you could all see.
Two monitors. And at one point, I think in season 2, there were about 400 interns in the room. Do you guys remember that? David is a teacher. He's a wonderful teacher. So he was very dedicated to sharing his brilliance, his literary acumen, his warmth, his humor, and he really wanted everyone to learn. And I think he brought that to the set too. But for us, it was, I can only speak for myself, it was always like, oh, I'm just waiting, kind of what you were saying, the inspiration, just wanted that inspiration. And he's so generous, and I think all of us felt that too, the generosity of not only his intelligence, but, his just, he wanted you to be the best you could possibly be. And it was what Robin was saying, that the ugliest parts of you were embraced and celebrated, and when you were there with him. I remember one day, because when I first came on the show, I was so, it was just a world I was not prepared to be involved in, and on any level, because it was so intimidating. I remember just Gregg looking at me sometimes like, oh, where did this girl come from? And why has all this responsibility sort of fallen to her? But that was David. David wanted me and all of us to rise and rise and rise and be the best we could possibly be. And that, meeting him it just continues to be so inspiring. And I worked on the movie with him and side by side, and that was, I don't even have any words to describe what that was. But
I think one of the amazing things about David as a showrunner, and this is a very rare quality, is that he gave so much credit to writers on scripts. A lot of times I've worked with showrunners who will have put their names on everything, and David would give credit away, not unwarranted necessarily, but that wasn't important to him, was sort of taking that credit. And that isn't what I came to learn as a very, very rare quality.
For anybody who wants to take this, what did you carry away from this experience? Like, what is the most important thing that you carried away from this experience of working on Deadwood?
I think it's kind of what the theme of the show is. It's community. That not one person matters, everybody matters. And that's where we're all gonna, fall and rise together. And that, I feel like that comes through everything. I feel like you're talking about what is a Deadwood moment, and I feel like all the Deadwood moments to me start with so much heart and so much kindness and so much love, even with Swearengen, making fun of Jules singing like it was like he'd been stabbing a frog, and there was still so much, you knew he loved her so much, he was teasing her, and it sort of taught me, because in different rehearsals, David, even if it was like a snarky scene or somebody was arguing, he would say the more loving thing to do, and you'd sort of filter the scene through that, and it does something to the scene that maybe the audience doesn't know what it is, but they respond to it because there's so much truth in it, so much heart and kindness, which is what we are. And so I try to remember that when I work on characters and shows and things. It seems simple, but it's easy to forget to start there.
Well, Tim.
Well, no, the relationships were so full and so rich.
That line, a lie agreed upon, is very important in the whole structure of everything. And I always get a kick out of the fact that Seth and Al are so alike, and I always get a kick out of seeing the movies, because the scenes together, because it's like one of us can't wait to get away from the other, even though they really admire each other in a strange way, and they're very similar. They're the other sides of the coin, if you like, but they can't be in each other's presence for more than 5 minutes without wanting to fucking kill each other. Which is and it's implied. It's not the way it's written. It's always written on another way, but there's another level of it. And the lie agreed upon is the fact that when two people talk to each other, there's always something, a common understanding. You don't go there, or you don't. And that's part of David's writing, which always fascinates me. You know,
it's what you're saying. It's another level. All these jobs, we're very lucky to do what we do. And sometimes it's easy to pretend like it's not a big deal. And, I tend to act a smart ass and whatever, but it's a lovely, lovely job. And they're all very wonderful and sort of romantic, and it's sort of a summer camp for adults, and you have these amazing relationships, and they're very temporary. But this one, over the years, I think what separates it is that we were all living a very full life in that setting, a much more full understanding by just doing the work and living it out, and just by being around David, being around all these others, you see the possibilities, and to some degree it's a curse. You go to other jobs, you suggest something that could be done. They say, we can't do that, that shoots tomorrow. I said, no, I've seen it. I've seen the possibilities. I've seen how far it can go. See how much further it could go, how much richer it could be. And you just, I remember David Mamet had a line in one of his movies where Gene Hackman says, I think of a man smarter than me, and I ask myself, what would he do? And that man for me has always been David Milch. It's really something special too. It's a job that keeps on giving.
Yeah, I've been nearly 40, at least over 35 years in the movies. I guess 1986, whatever that means. But I've had some really enjoyable times throughout. I've been so lucky, and I've had some really great personal success in projects. But I would say the two best jobs I ever had were Deadwood, when we made it, and then the movie that we did, because there's just nothing else like it. There's nothing else like it. Nothing more fulfilling or satisfying than working on that set for me.
Well, the beauty and the sorrow and the empathy of this show will live on forever. And thank you so much for bringing it to life. Our panel, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, he realized, oh, I haven't. I see.